Recently, the Nintendo Switch saw the release of Hob, the Definitive Edition, an overhead adventure game with puzzle-solving emphasis that I've been absolutely addicted to. Seriously, I more than easily sunk hours upon hours upon hours into exploring the world of Hob. So I am more than excited to have this video sponsored by Hob the Definitive Edition, which has been enhanced in this Nintendo Switch release by additions such as HD rumble support, touchscreen functionality, and some nice quality of life changes over previous releases, such as a more stable frame rate and an improved camera. While I was playing Hob, I really got into thinking about the games that defined this genre for me. This type of adventure game has really come far over the years, even if it isn't nearly as prevalent as it once was. So today on Stuff We Play, we're going over 5 games that over the years have really defined the overhead adventure genre for me. Of course, I'm not covering every single game in the genre, and there may be an honorable mention or two. And of course, this is my opinion, and my opinion will likely be different than yours. Plus, as I'm focusing more on games over the years and not the top 5 or whatnot, since I don't really do top 5 videos, we're going to be listing these games chronologically, with a limit of 1 game per platform. So, what defines an overhead adventure game? Well, these are games that do just that. They're adventure games that take place from an overhead camera perspective. These are often action-oriented and more often than not have a fantasy or medieval setting. Though these differentiate themselves from action role-playing games due to not placing focus on having a traditional leveling system typically, though they still may place emphasis on obtaining collectibles and upgrading weapons and other gear. So with that, let's get started into our dive into 5 defining titles in the overhead adventure genre. To start off, when many think of this type of game, the first one that comes to mind is Nintendo's Legend of Zelda. The original Zelda game on the NES, despite showing its age a bit, particularly with aspects such as cryptic, difficult to find staircases, is a classic for a reason. Tight gameplay, a classic story of one man elf thing's quest to find a piece of the mystical Triforce to save a princess, his battle against a giant pig demon thing, and a huge world to explore. However, for me, the series truly hit its stride with The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past for the Super Nintendo. This title took everything great about the first Zelda game and made it into a game that has become a truly timeless classic. There's a fantastic soundtrack, incredible gameplay, the introduction of the Dark World, a strange and horrifying counter to the standard world of Hyrule. There's so many reasons to love this game, and there's a reason why Link to the Past was my favorite game in this series until A Link Between Worlds came out, which, by the way, was a direct sequel to this game. However, though the classic Zelda games are genre-defining titles, you can find countless others on the internet talk about why these games are great, and as I'm a lover of everything weird and retro, I think we should instead turn our focus to the first game I can think of that wouldn't just take a stab at this genre, but would take so much inspiration from Zelda that it appeared to be just a clone of those games. This was Golden Axe Warrior for the Sega Master System. Originally released in 1991, right around the same time as A Link to the Past was on the Super Nintendo, this game is very obviously just Sega's take on the Zelda series. Based off of Sega's Golden Axe beat-em-up series, this game follows a young hero from the country of Firewood as he sets off to fight series' big bad Death Adder, who's trying to take over the world. In order to stop the evil overlord, you must find 9 crystals hidden in 9 temples spread across the land, and from there, you're off. Gameplay is tight, and graphically speaking, this title perfectly shows the Master System's improved capabilities over Nintendo's NES. I'd say this one would be an absolute must-play for anyone, if it wasn't one of the rarest and hardest to find games on the system. This title in its original form often sells for over $100 online, but thankfully, it's also available as an unlockable on the Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. However, Sega and Nintendo weren't the only companies creating games in this genre during that time. The late 80s and early 90s were debatably the golden era of overhead adventure games, with some notable titles being SNK's Crystallis and Nintendo's own Star Tropic, both for the NES. However, one often overlooked series is Neutopia for the TurboGrafx 16. Now, the TurboGrafx didn't exactly sell well in North America. Despite being massively successful in Japan, where it was released as the NEC PC engine, it was absolutely curb-stomped in the West by the likes of the SNES and Sega Genesis. But that didn't stop NEC and Hudson Soft from releasing their own overhead adventure game series on the system. This was Neutopia. Neutopia has several of the tropes from the previous games we've mentioned. It takes place in a distant past in a fantastical world. The big bad, this time a guy named Dearth, steals 8 medallions and it's up to you to get them back, and there's tons of collectibles such as gold, bombs, and power-ups such as the Falcon shoes, which allow for faster movement. As far as graphics and sound go, Neutopia is an absolute treat, and it seems like it should be able to stand toe-to-toe with the genre's best. However, it does have some pretty serious issues. First off, the hit detection here is rather wonky. On numerous occasions, I tried attacking an enemy only for my attack to miss. On the flip side, at other times, I was hit by attacks that didn't even seem to be near me. However, while the wonky hit detection would likely not be a deal breaker for most, as the actual exploration here is still super solid, what may ruin things is this game's reliance on long passwords to save your progress. This, however, is not the fault of the game's designers. TurboGrafx games came on credit card sized cartridges called Hue cards, and due to the nature of these, there was no real way for games to have built-in save functionality. Yet, if you were lucky enough to own something such as the Turbo Booster Plus add-on or the TurboGrafx CD peripheral, due to those supporting save backups, saving would then be enabled. What I'm saying is that if you wanted to actually save your game, you'd have to shell out quite a bit of cash. Even if it didn't sell that well though, Neutopia was a fun time, and it did eventually get a sequel in the form of Neutopia 2, which was a definite improvement over this first game. There were also teasings and rumors of a potential third Neutopia game, but unfortunately nothing ever came of that. Fast forward from 1990 to 1997, we get to the heyday of the original PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and Nintendo 64. The mid to late 90s were a renaissance for role-playing games and adventure games. Titles such as Final Fantasy VII and Ocarina of Time helped shape an entire generation of gamers, and it seemed that gaming in general, due to the introduction of games featuring 3D graphics to the masses, were going through a renaissance. However, not all such games went on to become massive hits during this time. By far, one of the best cult classics from this era that has only recently begun to gain attention is Alundra for the PlayStation 1. Alundra is a title that seemed destined for greatness. Created by some of the team behind the incredible Landstalker for the Sega Genesis and published by legendary game publisher Working Designs, Alundra sets itself apart from other games in the genre through its dark story and difficult puzzles. In fact, I'd say it has much more of a puzzle focus than other games in the genre. That's not to say its combat slouches though. It's incredibly tight, and each enemy has attack patterns that you'll have to carefully read in order to make it through alive. This game follows Alundra, an elf who, like most protagonists in games of this genre, is a silent protagonist. After getting shipwrecked on an island, he finds his way to a town where the townsfolk are being plagued by nightmares so terrible that they are beginning to affect waking reality. Thankfully though, Alundra is from the Dreamwalker clan, and thus possesses the ability to enter dreams to purge the nightmares from within the minds of those afflicted. As to be expected from a Working Designs game, every character here comes to life and you form a bit of an attachment with each one you interact with, meaning that when characters ultimately start to die, you really feel it. Perhaps the cherry on top here is the beautiful orchestral soundtrack that encompasses just as wide a range of emotions as the story of the game itself. Alundra pushes the genre by building upon the gameplay and mechanics of those that came before it and infusing them with a hearty heap of emotion. It's just a shame then that, like with most Working Design games, this one has steadily been going up in price over the past few years. Honestly, if you want to play this one on a modern console, I'd say just download from the PlayStation Network store for systems such as the PS3. And speaking of the PS3, let's skip forward over a decade to 2009 with a game that wonderfully pays homage to this classic genre, 3D Dot Game Heroes. I think I first discovered this title through one of Metal Jesus Rock's Hidden Gems videos a few years ago, and the more I looked into it, the more I craved owning a PS3 again, as the one I'd had as a teenager had broken some years prior. With beautiful retro game-inspired graphics, a sword that, at max health, literally is so huge that it spans across the entire screen, a character creation tool so robust that you can play as a literal tank if you want to, and a soundtrack so good that Scott DeWaz uses one of the pieces from it at the end of all of his videos, it is no wonder that I desperately craved to play this game. So, a few years ago, after moving to Canada for university and starting a new job as a delivery guy, I put part of my first paycheck towards a PS3 and a copy of this game, which, despite going for over $30 now, only cost me around $10 then. And I was absolutely hooked. 3D Dot Game Heroes has a really cute plot that honestly doesn't take itself too seriously. The Kingdom of Dotneo was once a 2D world comprised of 8-bit style sprites, but one day, the king decreed that sprites were outdated, and thus everyone had to shift into the third dimension. From there, it is revealed that years ago an evil king was sealed away by 6 mystical orbs, but a dark bishop who's comically evil has decided he wants to awaken the evil overlord, so, in typical genre fashion, it's up to you to travel across the land, defeat enemies, explore dungeons, and seek out various plot MacGuffins. It's a simple plot, but it really doesn't need to be any more complex than it is. This game is an homage to the games of old after all, and as such, places gameplay experience above all else. That's not to say that the graphics aren't pleasing, the OST isn't fantastic, or that the dialogue isn't filled with bits of humor and references to retro games, because saying so just wouldn't be true. It does more than just pay tribute to old school games, but also manages to improve on things you'd expect from a game of this genre. It's one of the best games on the PS3, and I'd honestly expect nothing less from developer Silicon Studio, who would later go on to work on the incredible Bravely Default games for the 3DS. And that brings us back to now. It really seems that the overhead adventure genre has gone through a bit of a resurgence lately, especially with titles ranging from the upcoming remake of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening to popular indie games such as the It'll Do series. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not mention Hob. Sponsored video or not, this is one of the best games I've ever played in this genre, and that alone is what cements its place in today's video. Originally released in 2017 for the PlayStation 4 and PCs, and recently given an updated release for the Nintendo Switch in the form of Hob the Definitive Edition, I originally learned about this game from a buddy of mine, and when he said it was right up my alley, he wasn't kidding. I remember the moment I started the game, when you as your silent protagonist awaken from a deep slumber and enter into a beautifully lush world. I was awestruck. The art style here is absolutely gorgeous, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that this is one of the most beautiful games on the Nintendo Switch. As you adventure through this world, you'll encounter other characters, all who seem to have personalities of their own despite there being no dialogue present. Hob is a game that embodies the idea of show, don't tell, and it managed to make me feel emotional and keep me interested through incredible interactions with the silent characters, by giving me stunning views from scenic vistas, and of course, by giving me a large world to explore that feels more alive than that of any other game we've covered today. Hob as well has more of a puzzle focus than most of the other games on this list, and these puzzles are deftly woven together. They can be challenging. You will definitely be scratching your head for a bit on some of them, but none are impossible, and nothing ever feels unfair here. Of course, that's not to say that the platform and combat aren't fun or present either, because they most certainly are. The platforming here feels particularly fine-tuned. You have the perfect amount of weight and mid-air control, and as a nice touch, you can cling to and pull yourself up platforms, a la the old-school Prince of Persia games. And of course, the combat is incredibly satisfying. You start off with just a giant hand, since one of your arms gets amputated early on, but you soon get a sword as well, and then, through systems such as a shop, can get upgrades such as a shield. Enemies, even the scariest looking of them, can all be dispatched as long as you examine their attack patterns. As a bit of a nice touch as well, there's a bit of blood spatter here that appears whenever you defeat most of them, though if that's not your thing, that can be toggled off in the options menu. Probably one of the neatest things about Hob is its sound design. There's many moments where the only soundtrack accompanying you in your adventure are the sounds of nature or the anxious ambience of a dungeon, and it sets the mood so incredibly well here. This is especially so in combination when paired with the beautiful locales. Overall, Hob is a beautiful game that, thanks to intuitive controls and a gorgeous world, is something that I feel most people can just jump into with ease. Hob the Definitive Edition is not one to be missed. I'd like to thank them again for sponsoring this video, as this is truly one of the most incredible games I've played on the Switch this year, and at $20 on the American eShop, picking this one up is a no-brainer. So with that, what are your favorite overhead adventure games? Are there any games of this genre that you have memories with? Let me know in the comment section below, and while you're at it, subscribe to Stuff We Play for more great content like this, or even back us on Patreon, because every dollar earned from Patreon does go back into the channel itself. And speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank a few of ours right now, namely the Golden Bolt and Justin Chipman, as their support really does mean the world to me. So with that, I'll see you next time.